Hello guys, this is Ryo Murata, photographer based in Tokyo. It's been a long time. It's been 2 weeks or so, if I'm right. Did you guys miss me? Probably not. So in this video, I want it supposed to be mostly on film camera related. If it's like something that's related to my, what should I say, like workflow? Workflow. That's what I wanted to say. If it's related to something related to my work, as in because I'm a photographer, I edit photos and at the same time I create contents on YouTube. So if it's like related to that, it's a must to sort of like showcase you guys what kind of equipments I use. And in this video, I would like to talk about the desktop PC that I built like 2 years ago, maybe, to you guys, to give an idea of what I use to like produce those like contents and artwork and whatever kind of thing. I guess 2019 January, so like 1.5 years actually. So the desktop PC I built my budget was roughly $1,100 or so, but depending on where you live, you can actually make the exact same configuration at a cheaper like cost, obviously. And in addition to that, if you live in the United States and I think in Canada, you can get away with probably the exact same configuration for maybe $800-900 because PC components are actually a lot cheaper in the United States, even including the tax. And in Japan, it's actually much more expensive to build a desktop PC DIY style. Okay, so before I dive into my PC, I should sort of state my personal reasons why I sort of like built my own custom built desktop PC. The main reason is before I built my PC, I actually was one of those Mac OS guys who, in my case, I use a MacBook Pro back in 2014 when I first purchased it. And that was basically my workhorse. I've been using that for like a long time. And it was around 2016 or 17 that I started to like look into upgrading that computer to a better one. But it turns out, if you guys have noticed in the past of what Apple have done, from 2016 to 2019, they kind of procrastinated the main functions of the keyboard, which a lot of people were concerned about, it was like jamming. And if you guys know, I hate things that jam. So honestly, after 2019, they didn't fix that problem. And I think this year they fixed it. But for me, I was like really pissed off. So I actually talked to a fellow friend of mine who was into like computers. He was an IT guy. And I actually talked to him and he said, is it really better to make a desktop PC for content creation? And he said, dude, you've been missing out because if you guys know, AMD, which it rivals Intel, have been like making such a great like fuss around the in the computer industry that you can actually make a computer at a budget cost. And that kind of scared the crap out of me because my initial budget for the MacBook Pro back then was like $1,000. I think the entry is like $1,500. So if I could build something below that, I'll be a happy guy, you know. So back in January 2019, I went to the stores and sort of followed what my friend said and like purchased the parts and built myself. And I had no issues with it. So that's why I'm making this video. And I've been using this for like 2 years or so for my like YouTube channel and also as an artist, you know, I've been using this as a workhorse, like PC. So yeah, enough talk. Let's go into the details. Okay, so in the description, I will list all the components that I've used, the exact same one, but obviously 2020 as of now, like the majority of the components are actually really, really cheap, and you can probably make the exact same configuration at less the cost. And this is sort of like a disclaimer to a lot of people, but you have to keep in mind of where you live, because if you live in the United States, it's obviously much cheaper to build a desktop computer at the same configuration in the United States than it is in Japan. If you guys don't know, like Japan is actually really expensive to build a desktop PC, period. So for my desktop PC, I actually chose AMD instead of Intel because if you guys know, AMD has been making a lot of commotion in the PC industry for both creatives and lots of like creators, content creators, and videographers and cinematographers and because they were making these high performing like chips at a less cost than Intel. And if you guys know about Intel, they charge a premium over their chips. And a lot of people kind of didn't like that. So the majority of people actually shifted to AMD around in 2019 or so. And I was actually one of those guys. So for the processor, I went with a Ryzen 5 2600. This went against the Intel i5. I forgot 9000 something. I don't know Intel's name, but it's a 6-core 12-thread like CPU that's actually a really great like processor, which I purchased for roughly like $200 or so. And combined with that, I used a Radeon RX 570 8GB. This is an interesting one because back then, making a desktop PC was actually a little bit more expensive than now because with all those Bitcoin, mining, festival going on, like the graphics cards were really relatively expensive, but right now they're actually much cheaper, so it's wise to make one. And you can probably get a better like graphics cards than that. And most of and the reason why I went with a sort of like a dedicated graphics card is obviously I was editing YouTube videos, and if you want to edit YouTube videos, it's wise to invest in some sort of like graphics card in this category. So RX 570 8GB did the job pretty well for this. So the motherboard, I went with an MSI B450 M.2 Pro. Or like the nerdy stuff's going on. Sorry about me. So if you guys don't know about for the AMD motherboards, the A320 is their entry level board, which you can't overclock. The B450 is a middle range card, which you can overclock. In my case, it does automatically, so I had no issues with it. The high end was like a X5 X470, the higher end, which I never looked into because it was like double the price of B450. The B450 was a happy medium, and because it can overclock, it also means that you can actually get your job done at a faster pace because the processor is like clocked at a faster like speed. CPU cooler is Scythe Kotetsu Mark II. It is a best-selling CPU cooler made in Japan, maybe? It's a Japanese company, but I don't know if it's a made in Japan, but majority of Japanese people use that CPU cooler. SSD, a solid state drive. I use like a Samsung Evo 850 500GB SATA disk. That's long for my OS boot up, and basically use that to like edit my photos. I basically drop all my files onto the OS and edit from there. Sort of like the OS is working as a scratch disk, so I'm like editing, saving onto the OS. And when I'm done, especially for YouTube, let's say, I have to like sort of like render that video. So what happens from there is I basically render it out to a different SSD, external SSD, which is the Crucial BX500 240GB. It's so long, my goodness. It's like a tongue twister, which works as sort of like a temporary like output like disk. Actually, I basically like stick like a couple of files in there after I'm done shooting like videos and editing it and saving it, and when I'm done and when my sort of like project like ends, I save that file onto the hard drive, which is like 1 terabyte. It's a Seagate 1 terabyte backup drive, and that's how my sort of workflow goes. So that's basically my sort of like storage solution. Obviously, it's not the best solution. The best solution would be like having 2 hard drives working in a RAID configuration, meaning that you save onto one disk and it kind of mirrors onto the other one. And you never know when the hard drive is gonna fail. So if one fails, you just have to like throw that out and swap in a new one, and it mirrors back in. That's probably the best way to like save files at a cheapest like price instead of like saving onto the cloud, which is you have to pay a subscription fee. And to tie everything up, For the power supply, I use like a 500 watt like power supply. Nothing spectacular. It's like a 500 watt bronze plus, 80 plus, 85 plus. And rear and front intake, I use a deep cool fan. Yes, that's giving out that flashy look if you like it. Yeah, so sexy. So you guys might be asking me, okay, so I have a limited budget. I don't know what to sort of like buy specifically. I actually made a list in the description below, and I'm gonna be talking about it, of a sort of like a budget version of this, which can do a lot. Like it can do like 80-90% of what I'm doing in photo editing. It might be a little bit slower, but still will get the job done, and you can shave so much money off of this system. And the configuration would look like this. The first of all is the processor is the Ryzen 3 3100. This is like equivalent to the Intel Core i3 10100K or something. No, there is no K. So 10,100. It's equivalent to that one on the Intel side. So this is an interesting processor because it uses the newest technology in that like Ryzen 3 lineup, or not Ryzen 3, the Zen 2 lineup, which uses a 7 nanometer like processing node. And you guys don't care about that, but what's important is that this processor is almost equivalent to a Core i7 back in like 2000. Core i7, I think 6700K, which a lot of professionals used like 3-4 years ago. And my workplace actually still uses that like processor. And it's amazing because that processor back then cost like $400, $400, and you can purchase this for like $120, $30. And there's this sort of like climb of like price going on right now because a lot of people are being locked in due to the pandemics, and there's limited supply, and not many people are able to like purchase it at the retail price right now. But still, it is a really cheap processor. And along that, the motherboard is exactly the same as I'm using, the B450 type M.2, or it could be like the Asus B450 Prime K or A. K is, I think the K only has 2 RAM slots and the A has 4 RAM slots. So if you're like thinking of like upgrading your RAM to like 8 gigabytes multiplied by 4, you can get like 32 gigabytes, or maybe 64 gigabytes of RAM, which mostly people don't need. I don't know why I said that. So for GPU, like photo editing, honestly, you really don't need a dedicated GPU, but it might be good to have one and just use it for a super long time because they usually like last a really long time. And I would suggest like a GTX on an NVIDIA side, GTX 1050 Ti, 4 gigabytes. And on the AMD side, there's a Radeon RX550 Aero ITX, meant for ITX cases, but they can be like used in like large like enclosures, which is probably 2/3 the cost of the NVIDIA GTX like 1050 Ti. And for the RAM, instead of 8 gigabytes, I highly suggest getting 16 gigabytes. And this is something I actually messed up when I built my PC. I actually went ahead and bought a Vengence LPX RAM, which was clocked at 2666 megahertz. 2666 megahertz DDR4. Yeah, I said it. And I realized that on the Intel side, the RAM speed doesn't matter, but on the Ryzen side, it actually matters a lot more. And when I first started using my PC and I was using that 2666 megahertz RAM stick, it felt really sluggish, and I wasn't sure the reason. But when I did some digging, I realized that like Ryzen processors in general want you to use like a higher like frequency, which means that you have less latency between like passing those like data across like boards and memory. So I swapped that out with the HyperXFury X, or HyperXFury. 3200 megahertz, and everything went super smooth. So that's like one of the things that you need to keep in mind, that the RAM speed matters more on the AMD side, and it's best. And 3200 megahertz is the happy medium right now, and a lot of people say that that's either the 3000 or 3000. If you can afford it, the 3200. The higher the frequency, the more expensive it's gonna get, but 3200 megahertz is the happy medium. And along with that, the price of the RAM has dropped significantly due to less people like purchasing these like RAMs, and you know, that's ironic because the processor is actually increasing in price while the RAM and the SSD is actually decreasing in price. So there's this excess supply going on. So it might cancel out hopefully when you like build this PC. So you could use the stock cooler if I'm right. So can I? Oh crap! I can overclock it. Ooh, that's something. That's a bonus. So this is like one of the biggest difference between AMD processors versus like Intel. The reason why a lot of people went with AMD is because the majority, like 95% of them, or maybe 100 if I'm right, I'm not sure about the newest one, but even the entry level like processor, you can actually overclock it like automatically out of the box without any configuration. Yes, the processors that I just said, the Ryzen 3 3100, you can actually overclock it from 3.6 gigahertz to 3.9 gigahertz. That's really high actually, and it still uses only 65 watts, which is like really a cool like processor. So going back onto topic, that's something new. And yes, like honestly, it's a 65 watt processor, meaning that it doesn't give out a lot of heat when it's like doing the processing work. So you'll be fine with the stock cooler if it's. And for backup, it depends on what you do, but like photo editing, like 1 terabyte or maybe 2 terabyte might be cheaper alternative to that, like a Seagate Barracuda or Western Digital Blue like hard drive. 3.5 inch would probably be sufficient for your needs. And case wise, I use a Versa H26, which is a tower type, mid tower type. There's actually a Versa H18, which is much more compact and can like, it'll take less space. So probably majority of people will be happy with that. And if you have like a 400 watt, 500 watt like PSU power supply unit, you'll be fine. And intake fans and OS, which in grand total will cost roughly $612 USD. In Japan, it will cost like $700, but depending on where you live, you might get away with a cheaper like pricing of these components. And honestly, if you compare $612 versus $1,000 that I pay for my like computer, that's really cheap, you know, when you think about it. It's like how far technology have gone past, and this Ryzen 3 3100 performs similar to a Core i7 back in the days. It's amazing how one company is making a difference to all of us. And at the same time, it's like what's interesting is if you actually work hard on this, you might, if you make with the GTX 1050 Ti, the GPU combo, you can probably edit full high-res footage for YouTube content. So for majority of people, this will be a great like starting point, entry point for like content creations. And honestly, I should have built this instead and saved like $400 or $500, you know. And like with that $500, you could like purchase like the camera that I'm using, like an Osmo action camera and a mic case and a tripod, and you're like good to go. Honestly, man, I use so many money on my computer, like I feel like an idiot, you know. So yeah, that's basically that's everything that I talked about, and hope you guys enjoy this video. And I'm like sort of can't believe that this PC is like so cheap to build now. I feel like an idiot. Yeah, so hope you guys enjoy this video. thumbs up if you liked it, and if you're interested in these types of video, I'm not going full on out with computers and stuff like that, but like to get some sort of like indication of what kind of equipments I use for my work and help you guys out if you guys are like thinking of like making a computer, or like if you're like bored and have like nothing to do, this might be a great time to like consider making one, because it's like something you use every day, and probably if you photo edit, you have a PC that's getting old or something, and it might be a good time to like, I don't know, change that up. And I don't know, change is good in life, you know. So I hope you guys like this video, and please subscribe, and hope you guys to see you guys next time. Thank you.